Welcome to the module that introduces a brand new set of suffixes for the verb system, what we call the secondary suffixes, and also the module that introduces the imperfect, indicative, and the forms for the active, middle, passive voices. So far, we have covered two tenses. We've covered the present tense and we've covered the future tense. In the present tense, we've covered the active, middle, passive forms. In the future, we've only covered the active and middle forms. We have not yet covered the passive forms yet. The passive forms is actually a separate form to be learned in Greek too. And for this module, we'll be learning the imperfect indicative and its active, middle, and passive forms. But in order to do that, we have to learn a brand new set of suffixes. If the present tense and the future tense use the primary suffixes, active and middle passive, the imperfect indicative uses what we call the secondary suffixes. And these are going to be in the active, middle passive forms. So it's a brand new set of suffixes that we'll learn, and also a brand new way of adding different components together to form the imperfect, active, middle, and passive forms. So by way of review, if you were to look at the chart to the left, we have the example of the present tense being used. And so this column here are the suffixes, but in the example that we gave, we've attached those suffixes to a connecting vowel. So all familiar with o, ace, a, amen, ette, usi for the active forms, and for the middle passive forms, o, my, a, etai, amata, este, antai. For the imperfect indicative, we are going to learn a different set of suffixes, and these are a little bit harder to recite, but I think the best way to do it is like this. So for the first person singular, second person singular, third person singular forms, and then also the first person plural, second person plural, third person plural forms, the active suffixes are nu or nothing, sigma, nothing, with a movable nu, men, te, nu. Or to make it simpler, you can simply say nu, sigma, nothing, men, te, nu. Those are the suffixes that we use for tenses like the imperfect. And for the middle passive suffixes that are secondary, we're using main, sa, ta, mete, site, ninta. Main, sa, ta, mete, site, ninta. These suffixes do not have a connecting vowel with them, and there will be some slight changes to what the suffixes look like once the connecting vowel is added. So let's see how these secondary suffixes are used in the imperfect indicative forms. The imperfect tense is a past time tense, but more importantly than the time of the verb is the kind of action the imperfect represents. The imperfect is a past time verb that focuses on the continuous aspect of the verb. So if the present tense was translated as I am loosing, the imperfect tense is translated as I was loosing. So it's a past time verb with an ing translation to indicate the kind of action that's taking place. The imperfect cannot be translated as I loosed. That's wrong. The reason why is because in past time, Greek actually has a separate tense called the aorist tense. We're not going to learn the aorist tense for this module. The aorist will be addressed in Greek too. But I'm just mentioning it here because if you wanted to say I loosed, you would not use the imperfect, you would use the aorist. Therefore, the only proper way to translate something in the imperfect is to translate it in English with an ing verb. So you must translate it as I was loosing, or the second person singular being you were loosing, the third person singular being he, she, it was loosing. But if you translated it as I loosed, you loosed, he, she, it loosed, that is incorrect and it'll be marked wrong for the imperfect indicative. Now, how do I form the imperfect indicative? Let me clear the board a little bit. The imperfect indicative is formed by adding a prefix to it, to the stem. So this is something new. You're actually adding for the first time something in front of the stem of the verb. And this particular type of prefix is called an augment, represented by the epsilon with a smooth breathing mark. The augment is a linguistic component to the verb that indicates past time. So something in the indicative mood that is past time will often have the epsilon as its augment to indicate that it's a past time verb. So to form the imperfect active indicative, which is a past time tense, use luo as our paradigmatic verb. So the stem being lu. To form the imperfect active indicative, you take the augment, you add the stem, you add the connecting vowel, but instead of the primary active suffixes, you now add the secondary active suffixes, the nu, sigma, nothing, men, te, nu. So if I were to put these components together, for the first person singular, I was loosing, that form is a luon. A luon means I was loosing. For the second person singular form, add the augment, add the stem, add the connecting vowel, and add the secondary active suffix for the second person singular, and you get a lues. And this is you were loosing. For the third person singular, he, she, it was loosing. That form is elue, and so you might find it as elue, but it does have a movable nu. So you either see it as elue or eluen. We were loosing is eluomen. The second person plural form is you all were loosing is eluete. And the third person plural form, they were loosing, is eluon. And yes, if you notice, for the imperfect active indicative, the first person singular eluon and the third person plural eluon are exactly the same forms. And so eluon, this one form, can either be translated as I was loosing or they were loosing, and context will tell you which is the best choice. If I want to form the imperfect middle or passive indicative, I use a different formula where I add an augment with the stem and the connecting vowel, and this is a typo, and I use the secondary passive suffixes. And just for simplicity's sake, let's translate the form as a passive, although for each of these forms, the first person singular, second person singular, third person singular, first person plural, second person plural, third person plural, these forms can either be translated in a passive way or a middle way, and context will tell you. But since the passive translation is the more frequent translation, we'll be translating in the passive way. So how do I say I was being loosed? I was being loosed. I take the augment, the stem, the connecting vowel, and I add the secondary passive or middle suffixes, which are a completely different set of suffixes, which is main, sa, ta, meta, sute, nunta. So to say I was being loosed, that would be elu a main. That's I was being loosed. If you translate this as simply I was loosed, that is incorrect. Remember that the imperfect, its emphasis is on the continuous or process of the verb. And we have, again, a second past time tense, the aorist, that can be used to talk about past time events in an undefined way. So it must be translated as I was being loosed. If you were to write it as I was loosed, that's an aorist translation and not an imperfect translation. So how about the form for the second person singular? Well, like the present second person singular, we're going to expect a change actually, or set of vowel contractions, because we have a sigma that does not like to be sandwiched between two vowels. So although when we add the components together, we would think we would get elu esa. The sigma does not like being sandwiched between two vowels, so the sigma drops, and when the epsilon and omicron combine, it actually forms u, the diphthong u. So the final form for you were being loosed is eluu, and that's you were being loosed. He, she, it was being loosed is eluata. We were being loosed is eluamitha. You all were being loosed is elu esthe. And they were being loosed is elu anta. Let's say these forms together. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Eluamain, eluu, eluata, eluamitha, eluesthe, eluanta. Let's say it again. 1, 2, 3. Eluamain, eluu, eluata, eluamitha, eluesthe, eluanta. And those are the imperfect middle passive forms.